It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, Monsignor Shea. Monsignor Shea became the 6th president of the University of Mary in 2009 at the age of 34, making history as the youngest college president in the United States at that time. Growing up as the eldest of 8 children on a dairy farm near Hazleton, North Dakota, Monsignor Shea's journey in education began with a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He continued his studies in theology at the Gregorian and Lateran universities in Rome. Monsignor Shea is the author of the influential book From Christendom to Apostolic Mission, Pastoral Strategies for an Apostolic Age, as well as the sequel that is on your table tonight. He has shared his insights and expertise at numerous Catholic leadership conferences, including the Napa Institute, Seek, and Catholic Rural Life, among many others. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Monsignor James Shea.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Everybody, what an honor to be here with you tonight. Mother, sisters, my brother priests, dear friends and family of Kolbe Academy. It's a joy to be able to be here for this graduation event. I was able to say the baccalaureate mass tonight, and it was really wonderful to look out over all of those young people, some of them meeting each other for the first time, even though they've been in school together for a long time. And I was just really, really excited for tomorrow and for everything that their education represents, because Kolbe Academy is doing something which is really important, I think, in the landscape of the Catholic Church in this country. I've been president now at the University of Mary for 15 years. And it's been like a slow flood in a valley, you know what I mean? I've watched the growth of Kolbe Academy, and of course we've had some graduates come to our campus and they make an amazing contribution. So I'm very grateful for the work of Kolbe Academy, and I think that this effort, this apostolic work, is on the forefront of Catholic secondary education, and so I'm very grateful to all of you who are involved in it. I've been asked to talk about forming apostolic hearts. And I think the reason that I was asked, in fact, this is what they wrote to me, has to do with that small essay that Jordan mentioned, From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. And I want to tell you just a little bit of the background about that. You know, at a certain point, there was a group of friends of mine, and we began having a series of conversations about the church that we love and the circumstances that we find ourselves in at this moment in time, at this moment in history. There are certain moments in history when you can draw a bright line between everything that went before and everything that's coming after. And we're living in a time like that. To borrow from the Aparecida document, which was written by Archbishop Jorge Mario Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, ours is not an age of change, but a change of age. We're not living in an age of change. We're living in a change of the ages. And that means that the church needs to be very alert, because if we're not, we'll miss the signs of the times and we won't be able to bring the gospel effectively to the people of our time. And that's really, really important. And so that also touches upon the challenge of an enterprise and an apostolic effort like Kolbe Academy or like the University of Mary. Any faithful Catholic university, any faithful Catholic high school or educational endeavor has to be very alert to the fact that we face some perplexing strategic difficulties when it comes to winning hearts and minds for the gospel in our time. One of the reasons for that is that we're living in the first ever post-Christian society. We're living in the first society in all of history which once was thoroughly Christian. Not thoroughly Christian in terms of every single person in the society, but thoroughly Christian in its ruling imaginative vision, in what made the society run, in the institutions and the governing vision which was behind the society. C.S. Lewis said that makes the spreading of the gospel very difficult, and he compared it to the difference between winning the heart of a young maiden who's never fallen in love before, and winning a cynical divorced person back to a previous bond. The second, of course, is much, much harder. And it's much, much harder for us because we live in a time in which a lot of people, even those who say that they're Christian, have lost their grasp upon the fundamentals of the teachings of the church and of the gospel, and are actually living, believing, and practicing an alternative religion, a different religion than the religion that was taught by Jesus when he walked among us. In that first small essay from Christendom to Apostolic Mission, one of the most poignant moments, I think, that has had a lot of resonance with people is an occurrence which I think has happened to every priest who's sitting there at that table right in front of me. All of us who have been in priestly ministry have had people come up to us and say, "Father, I don't know what I did wrong. It's terrible. My wife and I, when we were little, our parents raised us in the faith. And they sent us to Catholic schools. They made sure that we knew our prayers, and they got us our sacraments. And we kept the faith. We did the exact same thing with our children, and it didn't work. And we don't know what we did wrong. We tried our hardest, and it didn't work. They've all left. And our grandchildren aren't even baptized. And people live with a kind of burning shame, not realizing, of course, that the ground has shifted underneath them, which makes the formation of apostolic hearts and the work of Catholic education much more perplexing and difficult. Or at least it means that the intentionality behind what we do has to be more laser focused. So I grew up kind of in the last gasp of Christendom in rural North Dakota. I remember I grew up in a town of maybe 250 people on a farm, the oldest of 8 children. And my parents, all the other parents of all my friends, my teachers at school, at a public school, the Catholic priest in town, and the Lutheran minister, and all my coaches were all on the same team. They all had a common project. They said, we've got a town full of kids. We've got 18 years. They're full of sin, top to bottom. And so we've got to figure out how we can form them and shape them all together into good Christians and send them off into the world. And that was the common work of Christendom. And so that was in the culture, it was in the air. My younger brother, number 4 of 8, the fourth of the brothers, is raising his own 7 children on the same farm all these years later. And his challenge is much, much more difficult than it was for my parents. He and his wife have to be much more intentional about the way in which they form and shape and educate their children, because they can't rely upon the ambient culture to assist them anymore, because Christendom is gone and something else has taken its place. I remember, again, the nearest Catholic school was more than an hour away. And so we went to a little public school, but on Wednesday afternoons, the public school shut down, and the buses came and picked up all the kids. And you either went to CCD for Wednesday afternoon during the public school hours at the Catholic Church, or you went to Bible school at the Lutheran Church. And everybody went on public buses. That was a different time. That was a different era. Can you imagine that happening today, where the public school would suspend classes for an afternoon once a week to make sure that the children had religious education? So we live in a different time now. So what are we going to do? In 2004, Bono, the lead vocalist for U2, gave the commencement address at University of Pennsylvania. In it, he quoted Brendan Kennelly, who was an Irish poet who was, I think, for many years at Trinity College in Dublin. And Kennelly wrote an epic poem called The Book of Judas, which is a complicated epic poem. But there was a line in it that Bono quoted. He said, "If you want to serve the age, betray it. If you want to serve the age, betray it." Now, that can be interpreted in all kinds of different ways. The way that Bono chose to interpret it, he said that in every age, there's a particular blindness, a moral blindness, and a spiritual blindness. And that blindness makes its way and wreaks havoc in the heart of the culture. And so to identify that and to betray it, to fight against it, is the way that you can serve the culture. So make no mistake, everybody, what's happened isn't simply that religious faith has vanished. People think that that's true. Everybody's wringing their hands in all the sociological studies, including by sort of good scholars, but they talk about the rise of the nuns, not you people. N-O-N-E-S, the rise of the nuns. And everybody's wringing their hands about it, saying that we've become an irreligious society. We have not become an irreligious society. We are deeply, deeply religious. It's just that the religion is not Christianity anymore. There's a new ruling imaginative vision which has taken the place of Christianity, a new kind of mindset which informs everything and which has seeped into our institutions, our ambient culture, and into you and into me, because it's the air that we breathe, it's the water that we drink. And one of the most important things that we can do is identify the precepts and the doctrines of this new religious faith and then be converted out of it. To be in a new apostolic age, to be converted more deeply to the gospel of Jesus Christ, to love and to serve him in the midst of our lives, and to be apostolic missionaries means not simply to be converted more deeply to the gospel, but to be converted out of an anti-gospel. The new religion is a parody of Christianity. Because it's Gnostic in its nature, it borrows widely and deeply from the Christian evangelical force and mythic power. It borrows from our fundamental precepts of faith, and it distorts them. And it distorts them in very significant ways. And so this second small essay, The Religion of the Day, is an expansion on the final chapter in the first essay, From Christendom to Apostolic Mission, an effort to identify and to define this new religion. And so just to give you a little glimpse, here's the wonderful sort of concise, elegant name for this new religion: modern neo-Gnostic progressive utopian revolutionary religion. That's the new religion. Modern neo-Gnostic progressive utopian revolutionary religion. Well, that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? But consider, this is the essence of this new religion. It's a scheme of self-initiated salvation. So it's salvific, just like Christianity. It recognizes that the human race has something to be saved from, but it's self-initiated. It's not at the impetus or at the initiative of God. It's a scheme of self-initiated salvation that locates the source of the world's evil not in the individual human heart, but in fundamentally corrupted and therefore oppressive structures of human existence, whether spiritual, material, societal, or psychological. There you have the denial of the doctrine of the fall, which is at the very center and the heart of this new religion. And so this is very perplexing because remember, G.K. Chesterton said that the fall is the only precept of the Christian faith which can be empirically proven. So why in a highly scientific age would we deny the only part of Christianity which you can empirically prove? What does Chesterton say? Do you remember? He says that somewhere in the world this very night there's a group of small boys and they're getting ready to skin a cat. If that's true, there's something wrong in the world. And it's located in the human heart. Also, that promises to radically overcome the evil of the world and the alienation and lack of fulfillment experienced by humans, that accomplishes this salvation through escape from or destruction of prevailing structures of oppression, however they may be identified. Everybody, don't you see this all around? That claims to bring about a new type of human being and inaugurate an entirely new age of freedom that has overcome this past age of oppression and that accomplishes its salvation through the application of some form of specialized technical knowledge that's gained by human effort. Oh, Monsignor, that's a mouthful. It's too sophisticated. We don't know that much philosophy, blah, 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 blah. It's just pride. It's human pride in overreaching, which is at the center of our whole problem from the time of the garden, in a much more sophisticated parasitic form, brought into, well, that's derived from the power and the evangelic success of Christianity. In the end, it's an expression of human pride. It's a kind of bizarro Catholicism. Chesterton also said that this has been true in every age, that the church by its nature is a lion tamer. A lion tamer. That there is always some grave affront to or challenge to Christian faith which arises in every generation. Our challenge, the challenge of our time, is a particularly virulent and particularly stern challenge. But that shouldn't at all discourage us. It should make us eager to understand together, arm in arm, what we're going to do about it. How we ourselves, first, starting with us, our minds, our hearts, how we can be more deeply converted out of this religion, which is all around us, and more deeply to the true faith which we've been given as a gift, not just for ourselves, but for the salvation of the whole world. And so in this text, then, so there's a long description of sort of the precepts of this new utopian kind of religion, this revolutionary, this neo-Gnostic, this progressive form of religion, which is at the base of every dark ideology of our time, every woke agenda, every sort of aggressive, impositional thing that we experience as Christians. This is a faith with solid doctrines which you cannot cross, with its own form of cancellation or excommunication, all these kinds of things. And so what do we do in the face of it? Well, you know, I just want to say this. It's really important, and then I'll go into just a few principles for how we can form our own hearts and then apostolic hearts in the children and the young people who we're entrusted with, whether at the University of Mary or at Kolbe Academy. The first thing that I would say, and this is really, really important, and it's important to me, but I hope that it's important to you as well. Part of the definition which I've given of this new religion is that it's utopian. It's utopian because the rejection of original sin fundamentally means that the world is perfectible. If the problem is not within us, if the problem is not a broken, fallen human heart which needs redemption, which needs salvation. And remember, I mean, this was rejected by the first Enlightenment philosophers all the way to a couple of months ago when Christopher Hitchens was on the Cosmic Skeptic podcast saying that the doctrine of original sin is the most evil idea, he said, in the New Testament. And so when you reject the doctrine of the fall, that means that you can perfect yourself. How? Well, by the right morning routine that you learn from YouTube. You can perfect yourself by rearranging the circumstances of your life. You can perfect yourself by making sure that you have actualized yourself completely through autonomy and through individualized freedom, or what the world understands freedom to be. You can also perfect the society around you by eradicating all of these systems and structures of oppression that are all around. And so there's a lot of anger in the land as a result of that. Our danger, everybody, and this is a very real danger, and I'm looking at you, I'm talking to you, our danger is that in the midst of so much seething anger, in the midst of a new religious faith which is based upon revolution, which is based upon violent overthrow of long-standing structures and traditions, that we ourselves could play into this angry state of mind, this angry tone and mentality. This is very easy for us to do. Anger, of course, arises fundamentally from pride of mind. And we see anger in the ambient society. And in the midst of that, because Christianity is a religion which was made for dark times, this is the kind of time in which we're meant to show up. We can fade into the distance when things are good, but in times like this, we're meant to blaze in the night. And instead, what we do very often is we take profound and deep anger into ourselves, into our families, and into our hearts. And this is a grave mistake, because what it means is that we've bought into the utopian lie. The word utopia, of course, was coined in 1516, right, by Thomas More, who was the Lord Chancellor of England. This was the year before the outbreak of the Protestant Reformation, as Martin Luther was preparing to fasten his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. Thomas More was releasing this long book about a perfect society, but if you attend to it, you know, it was a piece of socio-political satire. It was an inside joke, because the word utopia, utopos, topos, of course, is where we get, why am I telling all of you this? You're Kolbe Academy people. You're all fluent in Greek, right? Topos is where we get topology. You put a upsilon in front of it, it cancels out. And so utopia means no place. Thomas More, as a Catholic, knew that there was no such thing as a perfect society. And so what we do, though, because the modern mind is drunk with utopia, because we've denied the fundamental fact of original sin, which makes necessary, and in fact desperately necessary, our salvation, because we've denied that, and because the modern mind is drunk with utopia, we impose utopia upon our structures and upon our reality here. And so we allow ourselves, in a way which really arises straight from the enemy, it's from the imagination of the devil, we allow ourselves to think that our parishes should be utopias, that our convent should be a utopia, that our families should be utopias, that our careers and workplaces should be utopias, that the church herself should be a utopia. This is a fundamental error. And when we become deeply angry at ourselves and at others, when this utopian vision is not realized, it's our own fault, because it's a defect of mind. We don't understand. A Catholic parish is not meant to be a perfect society. It's meant to be an arena for human failure and redemption. It's meant to be a place where the Paschal Mystery is lived out. That's true of a university, too. It's true of Kolbe Academy. It's true of every religious community. It's true of every Christian family. We're meant to be people who understand the brokenness, the profound brokenness of the human heart and the human mind, but the overwhelming grace of salvation in Jesus Christ, which can penetrate every darkness and heal every wound. So it's very important. It's very important to me, because what I do is I sit at the University of Mary and take in what 550 new freshmen every year. And a lot of them come from wonderful Catholic families, but they are on edge. They're on edge. A lot of them are very much on edge. Why? Because in the hostility of the surrounding culture, they and their parents are worried about what's going to happen. And that worry, that anxiety can seep into a person's manner of being and contaminate the imagination and make us forget about the fact that the battle has already been won by Jesus on the cross, and then resurrection is real and the Holy Spirit's here. And that what we need to do is just not give up. That's our fundamental task as Christians. Jesus has cooked the books. He's organized things such that so long as we don't give up, we always win. And that's very hopeful, even if there's darkness all around us. And so we can find ourselves getting hung up with all kinds of darkness, and that's contagious, and it affects our young people. So I tell our professors at the University of Mary all the time, listen, everybody, this is our A game. We all have to show up, even the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Holy Spirit. We all have to show up for work. It's a work day. And so what we can't do is allow the anxiety and the fear all around us to penetrate our culture at the University of Mary, because our young people deserve that we'll pull up our pants every day and be big boys and girls and provide for them a season of life in which they can delve deeply and drink deeply from the fount of the tradition, without having to worry about what they're reading on the latest blog or Instagram post or on Twitter or whatever it's called now. We need to make sure, it's not that we're hermetically sealing our young people, but we're overwhelming them with the sweeping grand narrative of salvation, which is their story too. And we're protecting them from this utopian nonsense and illusion, which leads to deep, irresistible, and persistent anger. So one way to form apostolic hearts is to make sure that you're identifying any sources of anger and dealing with it. Good. So let me say this then. I'll give 6 keys, and I'll comment just very briefly on each of them. I'll give 6 sort of suggestions for how we can form apostolic hearts in a new apostolic age. An apostolic age, everybody, it's evangelization 24/7. In a Christendom time, you sent missionaries out, you know, but you can't afford to hide. There's no pillowcase or bushel basket that you can get underneath. In an apostolic age, this is game time for everybody. So what it means is that we need to understand and form habits of mind and habits of heart that allow us to be able to pass on the faith by living the faith ourselves. So here are 6 suggestions or points. Number 1, the centrality of the person of Christ. The centrality of the person of Christ. We have to keep Jesus at the very center, and it's really important. Walker Percy wrote that book, I think it was 1983. I think in 1983. So Phil Donahue was in his prime. Oprah was just about getting going, and he wrote Lost in the Cosmos, and he subtitled it The Last Self-Help Book. And it's very, very funny. Have you seen this book? It's very funny. You're kind of Southerners here. No, you're not. You're from all over. But those of you who are Southerners, you know, Percy was a Southerner, and so he has your style of humor, which is very funny. I have to give it to you. I have to give it to you. It's very funny. So he begins with a quiz to see if you're lost in the cosmos, and you take the quiz to determine whether or not you have to read his book on how to not be lost in the cosmos. But he says more or less that we find ourselves in an age which is lost in the cosmos. We don't know where we're going. We don't understand who we are. We've lost our sense of the meaning of humanity and society and God. We're just lost, we're lost, we're lost. The answer to that, of course, is our Catholic faith. That's the answer. And the Catholic faith is really magnificent. It's manifold. You know, it has a compelling metaphysical vision. It has a grand, sweeping narrative. It has beautiful art and architecture. It has glorious liturgy, manners of the worship of the living God. It has clear doctrines which are coherent in their meaning and the way that they integrate. But in the midst of all of that, everybody, the person of Jesus Christ has to be at the very center. And he needs to be understood by us as a real person. As a real person. The greatest teachers of prayer say that when you go to pray, you need to ask yourself, is there another person in the room, or am I just talking to myself? Am I examining my own thoughts? Is the encounter with the living Christ at the very center? And this needs to be part and parcel of our own practice of the faith, and every educational endeavor has to put the Lord Jesus at the very center. So the centrality of the person of Christ. The importance of awakened minds. So it's always been necessary. C.S. Lewis, remember, says that Christianity is a thinking man's religion. So it's always been important for us to be alive and alert, to have minds which span the panoply of the search for truth. It's always been important in every age for us to plumb the depths. But in an age like ours, it's especially important. Otherwise, we can be drawn in, even subtly, by seductive and potent counter-truths and false philosophies. And so for us to inform ourselves and then to be very serious, as I think Kolbe Academy is, about the transmission of the deposit of faith and of truth in all of its forms, that is a decisive and a deeply important task in a new apostolic age. The necessity of the true narrative would be a third suggestion or point of reference for us. What do I mean by that? I mean that, that it's not simply that the gospel, that the story of our salvation is the most arresting story which has ever been told and believed by large numbers of people over a span of time. It's not simply that. It's not simply that our story, the pages of the Bible sort of heave with the greatest villains ever and the most extraordinary heroes ever dreamed up. It's also that it's true. It's that it's true. The epic saga of our salvation is true. And we've lost somehow our capacity to transmit that. Remember Dorothy Sayers wrote an essay one time, "The dogma is the drama." And she spelled out sort of the faith with all of its implications, and she says, now you can say that that's rubbish and hogwash, but if you say that it's boring, that word has no meaning anymore. Or you're not paying attention. You can't call it boring. And so the epic narrative, the sweeping saga of salvation is something for us to transmit, but we need it to seep into our bones too. Brother priests, it's really important. This should be hung over the door, the entrance of every seminary, and it hasn't been, and this is bad. Nobody should ever start to study theology. They shouldn't be given a page of theology until they've been swept off their feet by the gospel. Otherwise, there's a prophylactic effect where all of a sudden you just begin thinking about God a whole lot. But that doesn't transform yourself or anybody. It's really important. We have to be swept off our feet. The true narrative needs to be more clearly and potently penetrated and then transmitted and taught. The primacy of mystery in the invisible world. Remember Frank Sheed, I think in Theology for Beginners, said when he was talking about the mysteries of the Catholic faith, he was a great apologist, of course. He stood on street corners in London and preached the gospel. In London, which isn't, even then it wasn't friendly. Now it's unfriendly and it's super expensive, so it's even worse. But he said regarding the Trinity, or the Incarnation, or the Eucharist, he said, to say that something is a mystery doesn't mean you can't say anything about it. It just means you can't say everything about it. I love that. To say that something is a mystery doesn't mean that you can't say anything about it, just means you can't say everything about it. This is St. Anselm's Fides Quaerens Intellectum, faith which seeks understanding. We should expect that the mysteries of our faith should be intelligible to a certain extent. We should be able to penetrate them with our minds, but if they aren't beyond us, then they can't truly be mysteries of God, because our minds aren't adequate to that depth of wonder. And so to have this appetite for mystery is very important. The modern mind has no appetite for mystery at all. In fact, has a deep frustration and an allergy to it. Because if there's something that we can't understand and dissect on our own, this is what Bishop Daniel Flores, when he came to our campus, he gave a magnificent lecture once on the synthetic impulse in Catholic life. Everything is analytic for us. We pick it all apart, we take it apart, but we don't know how to put it back together. And so a frog is just something to be dissected, but never to look at it and say, it jumps, it moves, it's amazing. And so this mystery, this question of mystery is important. And then the invisible world. And this is tied up with the last point about the epic saga of salvation. You know, if we tell the story rightly, if we let it get deep into our bones, and then are real and true witnesses of it, that develops in us and in our children and in our students a fierce allegiance to the invisible world. A fierce allegiance to the invisible world. What, might I ask you, was the life of St. Maximilian Kolbe all about? Who steps forward as he did in a concentration camp and gives his life for another man? Only someone. You don't do that with a purely materialistic sense of altruism. That's not possible. It doesn't happen. His allegiance was to the invisible world. He was present to God at that moment and then in the moment of his final agony. And that's what powered him. And that fierce allegiance to the invisible world is the whoop and woof. It's the warp and woof. It's the essence. It's the center and the heart of the Catholic faith. Two more. This is from John Henry Newman, making real what is notional. John Henry Newman had a sense in which he said there's real knowledge and notional knowledge. We tend to do it we tend to explain what he tries to explain in a much worse way. And why do we do that? So if we have great giants who have wonderful ways of explaining things, why do we then metastasize it into something stupid? So we say, head knowledge has to move to heart knowledge. This is what we say. Head knowledge needs to move to heart knowledge. Well, nobody knows what that means. I think people think that they know what it means, but I'm not sure that if it were true, it would be a good idea. However, he says, in a much more elegant and persistent and penetrating way, he says that we have notional knowledge of things, where we give assent, or where we come to perceive and understand a certain set of facts or truths. But that notional knowledge needs to become real for us. It needs to become real for us. And so you say, I'm going to Rome in 2 weeks. I'm going to Rome in 2 weeks. But you're going about your daily business, right? And then all of a sudden you're on an airplane and you're like, oh, I'm going to Rome. That's more real and deep. The Christian faith, Catholicism, needs to become real to us. This goes back to the centrality of the person of Jesus as a real person. And then lastly, true friendship in Christ. True friendship in Christ. So Christians have always relied upon each other. We have to do it now more than ever before. We have to form among ourselves deep, trust-filled, healthy relationships such that we can deeply rely upon each other when the chips are down, because we live in a stern and difficult time. And we need to be able to rely upon each other. That's why a network like Kolbe Academy, and I really love it because they've had me come on to talk. You know, they're doing retreats with the students. They invite parents, and it's a wonderful effort to bring together a community that spans really the country and the globe. That's super important. And even as we look out upon each other tonight, I know that many of you don't know each other, and I don't know you. But let's consider this: we're all headed for heaven. That's where we want to be. And so think about the possibility of knowing each other and relying upon each other. We have to see each other as friends in Christ, working with our hands to the plow at a common task. So those are 6 sort of suggestions. One sort of interim, which is to reject anger, which is a key tool of the enemy in our own time, and which is contagious and seeps into our own hearts and the hearts of our children. And then 6 suggestions: the centrality of the person of Christ, the importance of awakened minds, the necessity of the true narrative, the primacy of mystery in the invisible world, making real what is notional, and true friendship with Christ. And if you just do that, your family will be perfect. Just kidding. No, isn't it a relief to know that even if you just do all of that, your family still won't be perfect? So everybody give up. Anyway, good. So let me add one last thing. We are in the midst of a Eucharistic revival, right? This is deeply important, and this is one of the things that I said to the students at Mass today, the graduates at Mass. Their communion with Jesus, when you talk about fierce allegiance to the invisible world, when once someone's knowledge of Jesus' presence in the Eucharist goes from being notional to being real, and if that's ever happened to you, you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever had a movement in which your assent to the teaching of the Church about the Blessed Sacrament has gone from being notional to being real, you know that once that happens, it's impossible ever to leave the faith. You can't imagine it. It's not coherent. It wouldn't work. You can't think it doesn't work. Well, then that's our goal. If that's true, if what I'm talking about is true, that's our goal. To get people to that then becomes a central point of Christian and Catholic education. Here, I want to borrow some beautiful but also deeply challenging words that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in letters to his son Michael about the Blessed Sacrament. Can I share with you these excerpts? Because I find them very amazing. For those of us who love the faith, who love the Eucharist, who love reverence in the liturgy, who love prayer and adoration, J.R.R. Tolkien gives us both encouragement and challenge here. And I'd like to end with these excerpts tonight. Writing to his son Michael, Tolkien says, "The only cure for sagging or fainting faith is communion. Though always itself perfect and complete and inviolate, the Blessed Sacrament does not operate completely and once for all in any of us. Like the act of faith, it must be continuous and grow by exercise. 7 times a week is more nourishing than 7 times at intervals." Wonderful. 7 times a week, he says, is more nourishing than 7 times at intervals. Then he says this, "Also, I can recommend this as an exercise. Alas, only too easy to find opportunity for." So he's recommending to his son something that he can do as an exercise to strengthen his faith in the Blessed Sacrament that unfortunately will be too easy for Michael to find. What is it? He says, "Make your communion in circumstances that affront your taste. Choose a snuffling or gabbling priest, or a proud and vulgar friar, and a church full of the usual bourgeois crowd with ill-behaved children. Both those children who yell at Mass and also those products of Catholic schools who the moment the tabernacle is open, sit back and yawn. With open-necked and dirty youths and women in trousers, with hair both unkempt and uncovered. Go to communion with them and pray for them. It will be just the same or better than a Mass said beautifully by a visibly holy man and shared by a few devout and decorous people. And it could not be worse than the mess of the feeding of the 5,000, after which our Lord propounded the feeding that was to come." He ends with this, "Out of the darkness of my life, so much frustrated, I put before you the one great thing to love on earth, the Blessed Sacrament. There you will find romance, glory, honor, fidelity, and the true way of all your loves on earth. And more than that, you'll find more than that. You'll find death. By the divine paradox, that which ends life and demands the surrender of everything, and yet by the taste or foretaste of which alone can give you what you seek in your earthly relationships, love, faithfulness, joy, be maintained, or take on that complexion of reality, of eternal endurance, which every man's heart desires." And so I'll end there, because what else is to be said? If we want to form apostolic hearts, putting Jesus right at the center, and making that love for the Eucharist go from being notional to being real, which inculcates a fierce allegiance to the invisible world, and makes religion, as Chesterton said, less of a theory and more of a love affair. Well, that's all we've got to do. So let's do it. Thanks for listening, everybody.